Hello and welcome to Aston Originals. This time we're talking Derby County points deduction and incentive to cheat. I'm joined by Dr. Johan Rewilak from Aston University. Firstly, Johan, just give us a little bit of an introduction.
So I'm Dr. Johan Rewilak. I'm an academic in the Economics, Finance and Entrepreneurship department. I teach our undergraduate and postgraduate programs in economics and finance, and my research focuses on financial fragility and sports economics. So highly topical.
Highly topical at the moment. Let's talk about Derby County, as we said. We've sort of got a quote going along the bottom of the screen from an article that you'd written, and we're hoping that's going to be on Expert File as a spotlight. So I'll put a link in the description to that. But you've called Derby County Football Club entrepreneurs of financial accounting, sort of where their techniques are used to permit the club bypass financial fair play regulations. Can you just explain what you mean by that to begin with?
So in terms of accounting, there are normally set ways of operating and deducting expenses and depreciating assets and amortising assets. Derby County have been quite clever with some of the ways they've worked in the past. The best example is when a player is signed, his value is written off all the way to zero when their contract expires. And that's obviously to do with the Bosman ruling that occurred in 1995, where once a player reached the end of the contract, they can leave that club for free. However, what Derby County were doing, they were saying that at the end of that contract, a player still had a positive value for Derby County, say 5 million, 6 million pounds, which in fact was actually zero. So what they were doing, they were deducting less of their value for the years to try and inflate their profits and avoid effectively, they were cheating in financial fair play by underreporting their losses.
And you see you say the misdemeanours seem to have finally caught up with them. Recently been docked 9 points for breaching accounting rules. There's a further 3 points suspended. Just on the screen now, you can see that article on the BBC, if you want to go and check that out. But it's a total of 21 points, isn't it, for the season so far, because they went into administration in September 2021 this year. What does that mean for them now?
Well, currently they are on 0 points. So they've had a start this year where they've won 4 games and drawn 9 currently as we are, which would give them 21 points. But given their deductions, they're on 0. Now, in terms of the deduction, last year Derby County ended up on 44 points and they just escaped relegation. Add those 21 points onto their total of 44, they end up with 65 on being a top half of the table. Now, at present, Derby need to win more games than they should lose, excluding draws, to ensure that they survive in this division, assuming that 44 or 45 points will lead to survival. So effectively, what's happened with these points deductions, it's made it a very difficult process for Derby County to remain in the division. And it's almost as if this points deduction is almost guaranteed relegation for the team. Looking at the statistics from last year, unless you finish in the top 10 of the division, you were pretty much relegated. Even 10th place actually would have got you relegated in the number of points. And had you won the division, you wouldn't even made it into the playoffs had you had such a severe deduction in points.
And I think just on the screen now is just how that would all have worked out. And it really is, like you say, pretty much guaranteed relegation unless you are one of those top performing clubs in that season.
Absolutely, yes. And in my mind, I think the punishment is slightly strict. I would have looked to suspend these points deductions throughout the year, because the way I look at it, it's almost providing an incentive whether to perform or not. In US leagues, where there is no promotion or relegation, teams that normally underperform or can no longer reach the playoffs, they normally have this concept of called tanking. And the reason being is they'll tank and do worse as the season progresses in order to get rewards, for example, higher draft picks the following year.
And it's probably fair to say, actually, that Arsenal's owner, Stan Kroenke, who I can't remember which side it is that he owns over there is in the NFL, isn't it? That he does do quite a lot of tanking because he does want to buy the best players in, because those jerseys are worth so much more commercially than actually winning games is.
It can be in that situation. I think when we're comparing open and closed leagues, it's very interesting because in terms of the closed league structure, the NFL is just a single entity and you have franchises within that. And the revenue sharing and the processes and the labor laws, etc., that are associated with the NFL are very different to what we have in Europe, in particular with open leagues. For example, in the NFL, your contract is with the NFL, effectively, in the sense that one club seeks to buy you or draft you as a player, you only negotiate with that club through these various labour restrictions occurring in those leagues.
So when we look at the case for Derby County, I think you said, if the question is the punishment too severe, what would you have done?
So in my opinion, I think a 15-point reduction maximum is probably enough over a season, because it allows, or it creates an incentive that, yes, we can still possibly compete and survive this season. And the best way to compare this is looking at almost like prisoners. So when you look at the literature in terms of prisoners who have got a life incarceration without the possibility of parole, their behaviour is normally inferior to a prisoner who is convicted and has a potential to be paroled, because they know full well that if I try and escape or do anything, I've already got the maximum punishment. They can't do any more to me, which is in jail. Whereas the person who's got the incentive to be paroled in future is probably going to behave better, because they know full well, if I do behave, then the chances that I will actually get out of here are high. And if I misbehave, I know that eligibility or that carrot of parole might be taken away from me. And it's similar in terms of Derby County in this case, that if it's a 15-point deduction, they say, well, we've got something to fight for. We know that we can possibly survive in this division. Whereas if it's a sentence which pretty much is guaranteed relegation, then there's an incentive that, well, do you know what? I'm going to look after myself as a player, because I know the club's going to get relegated. I don't want to play League One football next year. I'm going to protect myself because I know I am capable of playing at this level. I don't want to injure myself and lose that potential future career earnings.
The EFL are in a sticky situation, aren't they? And it's something that doesn't seem to be going away. We've been through this evolution through football and the finances that are attached to it, and nothing seems to be changing, does it, Johan?
Absolutely not. No, it's the largest loss-making division in the world, effectively, in terms of, I don't see the number of clubs that make a financial or report a financial loss every year. It's just staggering. And it's almost in terms of the disparity between making it to the Premier League and staying in the EFL, the magnitude of the difference is so large and is growing so increasingly large that clubs almost gamble to try and get into that Premier League. And once they gamble, it's effectively that, okay, yes, we've made the riches, and you have a bad problem in the sense that every team wants to catch up. So if 2 or 3 teams are spending beyond their means to try and get themselves promoted, then the reaction of all the other teams is, we need to replicate that because we're never going to get to those higher echelons if we don't. And it's led to a bad equilibrium in particular the Championship, where you have clubs repeatedly making large losses. In my personal opinion, I think that the money that there is in the Premier League and the recent broadcast deal signed for the rights, Premier League rights to be in the US on its own, is worth in excess of £2 billion. I think it's $2.6 billion at the present. Now, over a 6-year period, that allows every single Championship club to be given £8 million per season, every single League One team to be given £6 million a season, and every League Two team to be given £4 million a season for 6 years. So there is enough money to keep these clubs and the community assets in business, but it's a situation where, again, perverse incentives are at play, where the incentive is that, oh, we can make a lot more if we make it up the higher echelons, rather than being, do you know what, we'll stay competitive in our league, and if we have a few good years, we manage things properly, bring in the right personnel, then we might have that chance to go up.
Now, this might be a slightly different question and one that has probably been asked a million times before, but do you think it will ever get to a stage where clubs are financially stable, especially in those top 5 leagues in England anyway? Let's keep it to that at the moment, just for some perspective and just so I don't lose my mind too much over it. When will clubs stop paying astronomical wages? Because that's really part of the problem, isn't it? Is paying these players so much money, but when we take the top performing athletes, say in baseball over in the US, or the top NFL players, there actually is a huge difference, isn't there? They're paid astronomical amounts in the United States, and usually on sort of like 10 or 12-year deals sometimes.
So in terms of how it works in the United States, again, with these franchises, normally we have players' unions who negotiate with the league to determine how much revenue or is going to go towards the players. For example, it could be 53% of league revenues are paid in salary or paid in wages to the players in the league. Whether that's ever going to be a case in open leagues in Europe, I don't think that was possible. There was discussions of a League One, League Two salary cap, which was mulled over around the COVID times when financial statements reported huge losses in the lower leagues, and the players' union disagreed about the salary cap, and that never came to fruition. So even though there was a chance to try and get a way to contain salaries and maximize salaries in Europe, especially in League One and League Two, that never occurred. I can't see it ever occurring in future, in my opinion.
I suppose a lot of this could be about prevention rather than cure, because we could argue that the punishment is more of trying to be a cure, not that it actually works, rather than the prevention. How can you see this being prevented in the future?
So I think contingent payments is a good method to use. And these contingent payments are that the Premier League has enough money and they could set quite a lot aside as provisions for the lower leagues. But in order to access those payments, I think it makes much more sense if good behaviour is rewarded. And we see that a lot in the aid literature, where to access foreign aid, governments need to open up their trade markets and so forth, which has been very common in development economics over 20, 30 years, where this aid effectively is called tied aid. So it has conditions associated with being provided grants and overseas development assistance. I can see something similar working potentially in football. I think that's probably one way to do it. But in other words as well, you also need to have good owners in place and people who actually care about the community assets of the clubs. Now, the majority of owners are pretty good, and having spoken to many owners, they actually do want what's best for the club. I know that owners have said, do you know what? They've been told, why don't we roll the dice this year? And they've said, actually, no, we're not going to, because we're going to safeguard the financial health of this football club for years to come. We're not going to try and gamble the future away. So there are good owners in there. It's just a case that we need to make sure all owners are on the same page. And as I've mentioned, it is a situation where if one team decides to gamble and go bust, the natural reaction of clubs in that division are, do you know what? If they're gambling, we have to gamble as well, because if one team spends triple the amount of everyone else, they're more or less going to get guaranteed to be promoted, because we've seen a very strong positive relationship between how much you spend and league position, in terms of the higher league position based on how much you are spending.
And because when you look at the league table and you do look at that financial side of it, I think it's actually your team, Manchester United, that bucks a trend a little bit, Johan. I'd like to point that out. I think they were the highest spenders over the last, especially 3 years, but then did finish second last year. So it's quite interesting. But if people want to sort of find out more on also the work that you've been doing as well, where can they go to do that?
So the best place to visit me is my Google Scholar page. We've got quite a few papers on there looking both at the impact of sporting mega events, which is going to be very topical, particularly for Birmingham with the Commonwealth Games coming up in 2022, and accessing the main journals in terms of the Journal of Sports Economics and the Journal of Sport Management and Sport Management Review and European Sport Marketing Quarterly, fantastic academic peer-reviewed journals. And typically, feel free to send me an email and get in contact, because I can send some really good information your way and network you with some other really good academics who are working in this field too.
Sounds great. Active on Twitter too. What's your handle?
It's Rewilak_3. So REWILAK_3.
Perfect. Well, Johan, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really interesting topic of conversation, and one by all means isn't going away anytime soon, but hopefully we'll catch up with you in the future just to see if you were right or if you were wrong.
Well, it probably will be wrong, but I think that is the best option, as I've mentioned.